Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 23. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. Today, it's Friday, which means it's the Picks Pod. And I know after last week's pod where we were hitting everything moving, I'm sure everyone's ready and excited to hear what we have in store this week. But first, I'd like to introduce you all to Cash Grab, which is DRF Sports' all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting who will win the first quarter, how many touchdowns will George Kittle score. Answering questions like these can end in you making real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. Now, hopefully, we can help you win some real cash here as well, as we do this twice a week. As always, on Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's a Picks Pod. As mentioned before, if you listened last Friday, things went pretty good for you. And after a no-show from the Falcons on Thursday night, I'm still feeling very confident that we got some wins on the way coming up this weekend. So hopefully, while you get some of your info from us, you're also getting your info from the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. So head to drf.com/sports for all the insight and analysis you need each and every day. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast. And Matt Russell will join us once again to keep the good times rolling on the Friday Picks Pod. We got some NFL picks, some NCAA picks, and of course, some college basketball at the end as well. That's all coming up. That and more right about now. Friday morning and the people want winners, and we are here to give them winners, or at least try to point you in the right direction. And I was on the Falcons last night, and even after they got smoked 25-0 by the Pats, gonna be honest, still not phased. You know why? Because last Thursday I lost that bet too. And what happened to finish off the rest of the weekend? Winners, 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 and more winners. So, Mr. Matt Russell, how you doing today on the Friday pod? How did you enjoy Thursday night football?
I mean, did anybody enjoy that game? Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, great outlook by you, right? Like, I lost Thursday last week too, and then won everything else. Like, why would I be fazed by this? Yeah. Listen, so here's the route that I went on for this game, right? We'll sort of flash back to Tuesday, and I talked about the idea of, Patriots. I'm certainly not going to lay the points with the Patriots, and, I would maybe tease it, but that's a little too, close to last Thursday's Baltimore teasing fiasco. And so by the time Thursday rolled around, of course, the number, as we predicted, got to 7, right? Because it was 6.5 at the time of our taping on Tuesday. And, again, I talk about like looking at my numbers and turning the iPad upside down and just going like, I can't get to 7. And I couldn't get to 7, right? The farthest I could get was 4.5. Now, a little bit behind the curtain here, I have sort of 2 numbers, right? There's the numbers that are based off of my rating for these teams and the numbers that are based off the market rating. It has nothing to do with games and how they went down, right? It has everything to do with the closing spreads, right? The point spreads of that game, right? And so we talked about, the idea that Atlanta, 7.5 point underdogs at Dallas, and now they're going to be 7 point underdogs at home to the Patriots. Like that doesn't really add up for me. And so the point is like a team can be wildly overrated after a few good games, the way that the Patriots were. But if the other team has no interest whatsoever in playing functional football, it doesn't matter how overrated that team happened to be, right? And so that game's 13-0 for, it wasn't 13-0 for an extended period of time, but deep into the game, it's 13-0. And you just sort of look back and you think to yourself, like, the Falcons had many opportunities to score a touchdown to make that game 13-7. And then maybe the fourth quarter is a little bit different, et cetera, right? Because that obviously got a little out of hand late in that game. But if you're giving up every opportunity to score that you could possibly get via like literally a bingo card of things, right? We have Matt Ryan sacks that are taking him out of field goal range. What does that sound like? A lot like a little Super Bowl we may have heard of, right? You're getting a field goal formation. Like it's a field goal formation, like a legal formation penalty on a field goal. Like there aren't any options. This isn't like, oh, a wide receiver was off the line when he should have been on the line and one guy's gone rogue. It's like you line up for a field goal all the time. Everybody knows where they're supposed to be, right? Like this isn't complicated. An illegal formation on a field goal. How is that possible? And of course that kick goes wide, and it goes wide with the last 5 yards, right? It was literally one where you go, yeah, he's definitely making that if it's 45 yards closer, right? So that's a turnover. Obviously the worst possible calls on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 that you can possibly imagine. A team that can't run the football against the Patriots defense, and they just run straight into the line, and you're just like, and they refuse to sneak because Matt Ryan's like leg is hanging by a thread and his arm is bleeding, and like it's a whole situation out there, and you're just like, that's even before we get to the interceptions, where everybody like, Shell, if that game's 5 more minutes, you get to come off the bench and throw an interception, because like it was just it was an Oprah Winfrey situation, right?
Like,
anybody who showed up to the game,
sequence.
Right?
That was an amazing sequence.
Anybody who stayed for the end of that game, like it was turning into like a raffle where you're like, okay, who gets to come out on the field here and throw an interception, because we're happy to have you do it. And so, 4 interceptions later, it's like they literally did everything possible to not stay in that game. And of course, at the end, the Patriots are like, yeah, we'll just accumulate a couple of field goals here. We're not doing anything particularly spicy out here. We're just kind of going along. And so, back to Tuesday, I mentioned the under being a play there, right? And so like, I actually won a totals bet. Now, again, why would you trust me with totals? I even said, I'm not great with the totals, but that game just reeked of an under. Now I would like to think that a professional football team could score, I don't know, 7 points somewhere along the lines there. And even if they had, that game would have still gone comfortably under. So, I mean, apologies to everyone who had to watch that game. I did it. Again, we're addicted to this stuff. I admitted that 2 weeks ago, right? There was no way I wasn't going to watch or wasn't even going to turn that off, because listen, even watching guys again off the streets, basically throwing interceptions at the end of that game is still bringing entertainment value into my life, even though at times it happens to be self-loathing. So ended up doing okay when it comes to the under and props and that sort of thing. But I mean, just a brutal way to start the week, even just from an entertainment value standpoint.
Well, the funny thing is about that, I'll be honest, because last night I was working last night. So I had that up, as well as the Raptors getting blown out in Utah. So it was just like, you just have these 2 games up, and it's like, this is what I'm dedicating my life to. Yeah. All right, cool.
There's a handful of nights a year where you go, you know what? Like, there's nothing better than this, right? I'm like, look at all these games. Look at how great these games are. A lot of times in the springtime with playoffs going on. Obviously in the fall, we love that stuff too. And then there are those nights where you're just like, man, they should pay me double for this type of thing. And unfortunately, they paid us half last night, unfortunately.
The beauty of the NFL is there's always just another game for us to bet on. And luckily, as we continue week 11, there's a ton of games for us to bet on. And let's get to that now. And just for those who might not remember, yes, we talked about last week being Fuego Fire and hitting everything moving, but a reminder of what we do here for the people who might be new to the pod. I come on, I give my take where I'm leaning. It's probably like the Joe Public take. I think I know a little bit about a little bit, watch a lot. Here we are. But then Matt comes in with some real information and what I like to call education on where the line is, where it's going, where it came from, all in an attempt to help us win some money. We just talk our way through some picks, If you want to follow us on social media, you get, the actual like finale of the finale. I try to post my picks in a running bit of trying to stay over 500 for the whole season. And here we are. So we'll start off with a game that is probably the biggest game, the headliner of the week, shall we say, as we have the 7-2 Cowboys at the 6-4 Chiefs. Chiefs 2.5-point favorites. And for me, this game, I mean, in theory, I guess it could be a shootout, weather permitting. If that's the case, I always like taking the points. But also, I think about the Cowboys offense versus the Chiefs defense. And to me, there's a world in which this could be ugly, because I'm still not thrown off by the Chiefs defense here having an okay game and Sorensen actually getting an interception, right? Like I still have a season of film of my guy getting burned and their whole defense getting burned. So I don't know. I like the Cowboys in the points here.
Yeah. So a couple of different things. So number one is, as a general rule, right? Like the higher scoring the game, the bigger the shootout, if you will, you might be more likely to give the points, especially in a low lined game, something under a field goal, right? Because if we're going to go touchdowns back and forth, right? You think of it like if a touchdown is worth 1, right? If it's a hockey game, it's a soccer game, whatever. This is a 5-4 game. If it's an 8-7 game, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're covering relatively comfortably at a set with a 7-point lead. So don't worry too much in this game about the points. And, I think it's highly unlikely that Dallas loses this game by 1 point or 2 points, right? Yeah. So like, it's not like that. I don't think that that's going to necessarily come into play. So there's a couple of different elements here from a football standpoint. Number one is, okay, market. How's the market reacting to what they've seen most recently? And obviously they saw the blowout of the Raiders last week. And so you go, if we're going to change our opinion entirely of this Chiefs team because they blew out the Raiders, like we're probably going, kind of astray of our general strategy here with regards to not overreacting to one game, because a lot of people were taking the Raiders last week, right? The line was 2.5. And I mean, got bet out to 3 for the Chiefs, but for a long time, it was -2.5. Probably never going to see the Chiefs -2.5 against the Raiders again, right? Like, I think no matter what happens with the Chiefs, we've learned our lesson, right? At least in the Patrick Mahomes era. But here's the thing. And sometimes, like you're watching a game, maybe there's a couple games, maybe you got a Raptors Jazz game on and you're like, you know what? I need to I need to have the volume up for this game. And you
trying to forget about that game, Matt. Come on, man. Flashbacks.
but you might be, talking to a buddy, or you do something, maybe paying attention to the wife, I don't know. And so you're not necessarily listening to the game. But if you listen to the Sunday Night Football game, Chris Collinsworth, who does a great job, did a really great job of explaining what's different about the Chiefs defense, right? And why it's been not necessarily good, but at least passable, right? He explained the Chris Jones element. We had talked about Chris Jones in a couple of different instances this year with whether or not he was coming back. He was coming back for that Tennessee game. I don't know, obviously, that he was fully back. And obviously we saw what happened, against the Titans. But ever since then, right, like the Chiefs defense has gotten a lot better. And it's because as he talked about, they've moved him from kind of playing him all over the place to just putting him back to defensive tackle. And they had to move him all over the place because they didn't have anybody who could rush the quarterback because of injuries and just general salary cap sacrifices that they had to make. Well, they go and they pick up Melvin Ingram. Now, Melvin Ingram's probably on his last season, right? But we have seen over the years, pass rusher after pass rusher after pass rusher, having that one last good season where those guys only need to affect the game 2 or 3 times, like on third down, et cetera, right? Passing downs, 1 sack, a lot of times will do it. Maybe there's a strip sack, deflection, whatever. And so he comes in and he's able to, he's not necessarily the star of anything, but he needs to be accounted for, right? And it's the same thing with a couple of other guys on that line. You mentioned even, in the back end there, where Thornhill now is playing a lot more for Sorensen. So there's a little bit less Sorensen. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe that's why he's actually getting an interception here or there, because his general play is better because he's not out there for every single snap, right? And of course, you still have Tyrann Mathieu, who's a problem still at this relatively advanced age. And so when I look at the defense, I go, okay, like it's actually not as bad as the reputation that precedes it because of a lot of these, elements. And like the Cowboys offense is outstanding and is probably going to score a ton here. But I think so are the Chiefs, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, we've had our concerns, and listen, again, one game against the Raiders isn't going to alleviate all of those concerns. So for me, this game, I kind of just made a case for both teams in a way. So it's really tricky for me at that -2.5 number. What I do like, though, right, in the idea of this being a last score wins type of thing, the rules, +2.5. How about teasing it up to +8.5? So I think this game as a teaser piece with, maybe it goes to overtime. Like I said, maybe it's last shot wins, if you will, or maybe it's just, say the Cowboys are down 14 late, right? Like, I imagine they will have more success than, say, Derek Carr at getting that last touchdown of the game to get it within 7, to get it within 8. So at 2.5, I think it's an outstanding teaser piece, even though that large total does leave room for sort of high variance, right? Either team in theory could win this game by 2, if you will, i.e. at 2 touchdowns. If we consider that sort of the hockey, the soccer reference from before.
Yeah.
So, that can be a little tricky when it comes to teasing, but I just think that this is a last goal wins type of situation here with this football game. I like using this as a tease piece more than I like betting the side here in this game. But if I had to bet a side, again, under a field goal, I think the Chiefs are actually decently valuable here.
Okay. Very interesting. I don't know why. I feel like maybe I've probably just been burned by the Chiefs too much this season.
Sure.
But I'm leaning Cowboys, which isn't the right way to look at this game at all. But that's just how I'm feeling. Just how I'm feeling at the time.
I have a high rating on the Cowboys. Like, I have a rating that's getting close up towards Bills and Bucks territory, mostly because the Bills and Bucks are coming downwards towards the pack here in my ratings. But, if you think that the Cowboys are that good, which again, I sort of do, my numbers come out to 2, right? My numbers come out to Kansas City, like -1.8, right? The market numbers come out to similar, right? Like, so there is technically like a half point to a point of value on the Cowboys. It's just, what's the likelihood of that number coming into play, right? Like, what's the likelihood of them winning this game by 2 and the value being the case, right? Because they are still favored. And if the Chiefs win, it's probably going to be 3-7, something along those lines.
No. I got you. I like it. And that's why we talk through the picks. And that's why we talk through our best bets, which we like to get to as well, which is a little different angle here, right? So first game, we got the 8-2 Packers favored by 1.5 at the 4-5 Vikings. This line seems kind of strange to me. So I'm going to ask you about the line movement or potential line movement that might've occurred so far. But I know the Vikings are a different team at home, but again, what am I missing here?
So, I mean, your assumption, I guess, is that the Packers should be favored by more. Is that what's sort of throwing
my
you
assumption
off here a little bit?
Just so it's the 1.5. The 1.5 number just seems odd. Like, I feel like the Packers, if it was 2.5, I could see that. Yeah. Maybe, you know what I mean? Once you get to 3, I feel like the dance starts occurring where you start getting more people hitting the Vikings. You know,
well, I was up against the wall. I got the toe tapping. I was ready to dance, right? And it's +2.5 early on in the week. And I'm like, are we going to get to 3? Because at that point, like, get out the limbo stick. I'm out there ready to get it down. Right. And so
I'm saying,
unfortunately, somebody out there, right, got a little impatient. Somebody went out there and just hit the dance floor way too hard. First hardcore dancing at the wedding, right? And there's 2 people out there and you're like, what? How are these, like, it's too soon for this. Like, we're not even done.
We're only on the apps. We're only on the apps.
Yeah. For God's sakes, we haven't even sat down yet. And these people are getting after it. And like, that's good news for a wedding, right? But it's not necessarily good news for those of us who are hoping to get the Vikings +3. Right. So unfortunately, now we'll have to sort of settle for this like nebulous -1.5, +1.5, +2 range here. And which is probably going to lead me to more money line than anything else here. And so, maybe what's concerning you here is obviously, first thing a lot of people look at is the record, right? And I couldn't tell you the record of one team in the NFL. Could not tell you the record. No, I know the vaguely, and you get into buys, and I know what week it is, and it's like 8-2 or 7-3. I don't know, right? I know nobody's got only one loss. I know the Lions are 8-1. That's like the list. Okay, so now I guess I lied. I know one team's record in the entire league, because the point is like none of that stuff matters because of these 2 teams. And you and I talked about the idea of like the Packers and their sort of randomness in their covering, right? Finding a way to cover in every single game so far, basically, I think since the Saints game. But look at it this way, and this is kind of this perfect example of what I mean when we don't get too caught up in records. The Packers have 2 games here that they share with the Vikings, right? They've both played Cincinnati and they've both played Arizona, right? So Green Bay's 2-0 in those 2 games. You'll recall the Cincinnati game, nobody could make a field goal to save their life. Cincinnati had, numerous opportunities to win that game. All they had to do was make a field goal and they win that game, right? It came down to one play. In the Green Bay, Arizona game, right? We were on that game. We were on that game plus the points. But from a win-loss standpoint, if AJ Green's not blocking in the end zone, thinking that it's a run play, why he would think it was a run play is beyond me. But again, if he's not, and he turns around and he catches the ball, the Cardinals win that game, right? Packers still cover, great for everybody involved, but the Cardinals win that game. And instead, right, 2-0, we're awfully close to 0-2 in those 2 games. And here's where the Vikings come in. Right? Yeah. Exact same situation. They play the Cardinals early on in the season, and it comes down to a relatively short Greg Joseph field goal. And he misses that field goal, and the Vikings lose, right? It comes down to a kick. Sound familiar? Green Bay, Cincinnati. Speaking of Cincinnati, right? The Vikings play the Bengals. Dalvin Cook's got the ball. His knee is down, right? We'll go to the grave saying that in overtime. Yep. And nope, sorry, it's a fumble, doesn't get overturned, and Cincinnati goes the other way and wins the game, right? So if he doesn't fumble, we get a field goal. Now, again, we're talking about Greg Joseph. We make that field goal. I'd like to think that he would. He's certainly made enough field goals for us this season. He just happened to miss the one against the Cardinals. So you got an 0-2 here, and you got a 2-0 here. And then all of a sudden, if those get flipped or go, each team goes 1-1, now you got a lot tighter situation happening in that division, right? But unfortunately, we don't think of these things like this, right? We don't think of like the Vikings being this division contender because of what's happened. And that's before we get into the close losses that the Vikings have had against the Ravens, et cetera, right? So just those 2 games with mutual opponents coming down to the final play tells you all you need to really know there. For this game, yes, I like the Vikings in this game. I'm going to be playing the money line here. I think this is a quality matchup for the Vikings. I think this is one that I had before the season going, okay, the Vikings, I think, are going to take both of these games with the Packers, or at least the idea that if they do, they are going to be live to win the division at plus 250, plus 270, plus 300. Now, they might be too far back now because of those games that we just mentioned here, but it doesn't change the fact that I like the Vikings before the season in these games, right? Because that's when you're betting divisional futures, right? You have to think of the matchup between the team that you're betting on and the team that you're needing to beat, right? And obviously with the Bears and the Lions existing in this division, it was a 2-horse race. So fundamentally here, I like the Vikings before the season. Just because the record isn't where it needs to be, the metrics are. And Kirk Cousins is playing to a top 5 level at quarterback right now this season from a metric standpoint. I know that's sort of crazy to understand, but like, it's true, right? The Thielen Jefferson combination. And I know the frustration of like, he's thrown to the fullback again. Like, come on. Right. But like, unfortunately for those of us who like to, beat up on Kirk Cousins here, he's actually playing really, really good football here. So you've got 2 really good quarterbacks. I know it's crazy to think. And you've got Dalvin Cook. And I think he's the difference maker anytime they face the Packers. Obviously, Aaron Jones not being involved. And I think a lot of people are saying like, well, A.J. Dillon just as good. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon do different things in that position, right? And so for me, that's a big loss for the Packers. Fortunately for them, it's not an extended loss here. It's just for this game and maybe the next. So for me, yes, it's Vikings here. This is the spot for the Vikings. They will probably win this game. They will probably lose a winnable or close game shortly thereafter to sort of wipe out all the good that they've done here in last week and this week. But for me, this is Vikings on the money line. I think they win this game outright.
Yeah, I mean, I hinted at liking the Vikings, just wishing I could get it at a better number, but I like that we're kind of here on the same level, speaking the same language. I like
what could go wrong.
No, I'm just saying it makes me feel a little smarter. I'm okay with that. Sure. But let's keep things moving here as a 3-6 Washington football team are at the 5-5 Carolina Panthers. I don't know if you heard, but some dude's back, but the Panthers are favored by 3.5 points. And that's a little too much for me. I mean, I love Cam. If you know me, I love, the swag of Cam and Cam yelling. I love all that stuff, but not enough for me to be laying more than a field goal. That's just where I'm looking at this. And I know that Washington is Washington, but it's the hook. It's the hook that has me leaning and taking the points.
Yeah, and if the hook's still out there, grab it while you can, right? Like grab it immediately. I write about Moneyline, the underdog Moneyline parlay. It's one of the sort of favorite things for people out there that I do over at The Score, and I put the Washington football team in the Moneyline parlay. Does that mean they're going to win this game? No, not necessarily, right? That article is a function of just where there's value, right? And so you can use that however you want, right? Value on Moneyline plays individually if you want to go for the gusto with the parlay. And also, if people haven't figured it out yet, it's also kind of my best bets, right? Because if there's value in the money line, there's value on the spread, right? And so if I like Washington on the money line, I put that out on a Wednesday, go and grab it, right? Go and grab the money line, but go and grab the spread as well, because it was plus 3.5. Now you're seeing it start to tick back down to 3. This line opened 2, which, at this point in the season, when it's opening, that's probably the right number. That's probably the number that I'm going to say to you is, the number that I have, because as much as I like that my ratings in a lot of cases differ from what the market ratings are, right? This closing point spread ratings, the stuff that is absolutely 100% quantifiable and, completely objective. And that number is just 2. It's 2 every which way, you can sort of add it up, right? But you're right. The excitement of Cam and the I'm back thing was really fun, right? You and I are we can get sort of stodgy and hate everything that happens that is sort of extra beyond the, field of play or the court. And that one was just all right, man, take the 15-yard penalty. You earned it in this case. That was an all-time sort of moment. Now, the unfortunate part here, I think, is that it's going to be probably as good as it gets here for the Panthers. Now, they're going to win a few games here, so I don't mean it like that. But walking in, and even if it's the B team for the Cardinals, but walking into Arizona and winning that game and doing so decisively, you're not going to get a 14-point lead against that team. You're not going to get a 14-point lead right off the bat against many teams, right? So that was kind of a perfect storm of a situation for Carolina. Now, Washington, obviously the issue and why you might lean this game upwards towards 3 is if you value Chase Young, because obviously he's out for the season, right? If he means 1 point to the point spread, then yes, I suppose you can get to 3, which is probably where this line is going to settle, because it's a key number as well, right? I can't even remember a time that I've seen a line go from 2 to 3.5 back across 3 to 2, because the liability there for sportsbooks, if that game landed on 3, think about all the tickets that would be won, right? All the Carolina minus 2.5 tickets cash, and all the Carolina plus 3.5 tickets cash. And at that point, right, the sportsbook is just fine, letting the game play out with it just landing on 3, and there'll be a lot of pushes coming this weekend. So yeah, I mean, there's a very real possibility Carolina wins this game by 3, and the Cam Newton excitement gets higher and higher and more intense. And now all of a sudden they're contending for the division again, which they were after 3 weeks. And then they were contending for worst team in the league for 3 weeks. And the whole thing's kind of out of control. But just fundamentally here, right? What's our expectation of Cam Newton straight off the bench, right? Straight off the street, let alone the bench. To me, it can't be much different than when he was playing regularly last year with the Patriots. And, people give you the song and dance about, he's healthy this time, right? He's finally healthy. He's back to why would we necessarily sort of believe that, or believe that that's going to be some sort of functioning thing that's going to change the way that he plays and change the way that we should value him. So it's basically a dare, right? Can Cam Newton beat me here? Can Cam Newton do enough here to stretch this lead out? Now, the defense itself could hold up. We saw some good stuff from Washington last week, but we're not going to forget about them having the force field end zone offense, right? So it can be a little scary there. But to me, this game comes down to a field goal one way or another. And if you've got plus 3.5 in your pocket, you are absolutely set. Give it a second, right? I don't think it's going down to 2.5 for the reasons that I just mentioned. So if you haven't gotten the 3.5 and all you see are 3s out there, just wait until Sunday, right? Because Joe Public is going to come in, and this might tick back up towards 3.5 with all the Cam Newton excitement and the fervor. But I can promise you, sportsbooks are well aware that Cam Newton is back, right? We are all well aware that Cam Newton is back. To me, that makes them overvalued here, and I like Washington.
And people want to bet on Cam Newton being back, and I'm here to be on the other side because of another clip that Cam Newton mentioned later on that might be a little more important. It was in the post-game presser where the guy asked him about, the question was just about how he's feeling in this moment. And he just said, This time last week, I was eating cereal, right? Like
Right.
there can't be anything more real than that to give you perspective on what are your expectations for my guy. So, hey, it is what it is, right?
And no one's ever thrown a touchdown pass after eating cereal the previous week. And so that's a little known fact. That's a little known statistic for those out there. And so it's entirely a toast situation when you're trying to throw TDs in the NFL.
Tom Brady, not a cereal guy. Jared Goff, though, big cereal. No, I'm joking. But let's keep
his tiny hands. He can just scoop it with his own hands. Geez. He's got spoon hands.
Low blow.
Listen, be better, Jared Goff.
I mean, they're 0-8-1 Detroit Lions. We're at the 5-5 Cleveland Browns. The Browns are laying 11.5 points. Now, that game last week between the Lions and Steelers was not a fun game to bet on at all. But 11.5 points still seems like a little too rich for my blood. Cool, the Browns should win this game, but I feel like I have to take the points.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like, I am bummed out that Jared Goff doesn't appear like he's going to play in this game. And it's because of the certainty that Jared Goff brings to the table. Now, you're saying the certainty because you wanted to back the Lions at plus all of those points, right? Mm-hmm. No, sir. No. I like the Browns in this game. I think the Browns hammer the Lions this week. And I was more certain. It was more certain of that when Jared Goff was going to be the quarterback, because I know what I'm going to get out of Jared Goff, right? Especially outdoors. Maybe there's some wind going on, right? We saw all we needed to see from him, where Dan Campbell takes the play calling away and it's just like, you know what? We're just running it. I can't watch, like, even the head coach is like, I cannot watch Jared Goff throw the football in weather like ever again, right? Unless we're absolutely forced to do it. It was first down run, second down, third down, run, right? And it worked for the first half. We talked about this, right? They ran one play over and over and over again. That was like, there was like 11 offensive tackles out there. It was a whole scene. And so I was ready at -10 where this line opened, and there was even a -9.5, and it was at like it was at a public book where I wasn't going to be able to get much money down on it. So I just waited, and I was like, maybe if I just leave this for like a day or two, the limits go up, and then I'll be able to hammer this -9.5, right? And you see that 9.5, you go like, God, please be a contest line. Please be a contest line. Please be a contest line. As for those of you who don't know, the contest lines come out on Thursday. So if you see a favorable line on Monday or Tuesday, you really just have to cross your fingers and hope that ends up being the line on Thursday.
Yeah.
Problem is, Jared Goff has this oblique injury, and maybe that's why it was such a horror show on Sunday. Sure, Jared, whatever. And now we've got this like Boyle Blau, like which guy is going to start, right? And like that's where the uncertainty comes in. And it's kind of like the Cleveland game from a couple of weeks ago, where you and I were like, I would like Cleveland at -1 more with Case Keenum more than I would like Cleveland at -3 with Baker Mayfield. Right? In this game, it's like, I would like Jared Goff, i.e. fading Jared Goff, if I was giving 9.5 or 10 more than I like, more than fading this uncertain, entity here. Now we know Blau, right? Which I think is why Boyle is going to play, because again, even the Lions want to trick themselves into like, maybe they have something here. Maybe they have a Mike White flash in the pan type situation on their hands here. So now it's 11, right? 11.5. And you're like, okay, so I'm not even getting a push on 10 and, yada. Fundamentally, this game comes down to like, what do we like about the Browns, right? The Browns beat up on these bad teams and they trick us into thinking that they are a Super Bowl contender. And that's what this is, right? And when Baker Mayfield gets pressure and he's panicked and he has to throw to win the game, it goes very, very badly, right? Here's the thing for you. Mason Rudolph threw 50 times last week in the weather. Like, speaking of things that were going on in that game, one coach doesn't want his quarterback to throw ever. And the other coach is like, yeah, fine with it. 50 times with Mason bleeping Rudolph. Like, that's cool by us. Yeah. And you ask yourself, like, why would he want to do that? Because Mason Rudolph is atrocious. We'll get to him. But the reason was, out of those 50 pass attempts, how many times do you think that Mason Rudolph got hit by the Detroit Lions? How many times did they get a touch, a contact, a literal hit, not a sack, a hit out of 50 times?
I'm going to say 10.
0 times. 0 times. Mason Rudolph threw it 50 times. for 240 yards and was never touched, never hit the ground, right? Like, again, we'll use that fact for us later on when we talk about the Sunday Night Football game. But like, that's all you need to know about what the Detroit Lions defense is doing, right? Like the defensive line's not doing anything. And this is against the Steelers offensive line, right? Which is not good. And like the defensive backs are terrible. So it's just going to be Chubb and Dearness Johnson and the play action and scoring. And like, this is going to be a lot like that Philly Detroit game where everybody was like, well, maybe they have a chance to beat Philly. And then Philly's just like, we're going to run the ball a bunch. You're not going to be able to stop that. And then when we decide to throw, guess what? You are not going to be able to stop that either, right? So like, even at 11 and a half, I'm absolutely betting on the Browns here. I'm just less confident by percentage points, if you will, in it because I don't necessarily know. Maybe Tim Boyle can actually throw the football. There's really no indication of that being the case, or I'd like to think somebody would have figured that out by now in the league, right? This is his second or third team. So for me here, like this is Browns or nothing. Like maybe it gets back to 10. Maybe Jared Goff plays. I imagine they sit him out because they have the quote unquote, and this is the mother of all quote unquotes, big Thanksgiving game against the Bears coming on Thursday morning for a lot of people out there. So like, why would you waste him in a spot here where he's probably just going to get annihilated by Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney and company? So yeah, like this to me is a little bit scary because it's a lot of points, but like this is an absolute hammer spot for the Browns, every single time.
First thing, Tim Boyle could be a completely made up person that you just made up on the spot. And I'd be like, oh, okay, sure. Yeah, he could start for the Lions this week.
I'm unconvinced that's his first name. I just said Tim. It could be Dan, right? Like it could be Ray. I don't know.
Amazing. But I will say this. I feel confident in my position here in terms of having to be talked into laying points. I'm okay with that. At any point while we're going into all this, if I'm being talked into laying points, okay, cool. I'm fine with that. My first instinct being, no, you shouldn't get beat by 11 and a half points Baker Mayfield. Cool. You come in and tell me why that's the case. I'm okay with that. Cool. Yeah. Baker, I'll be ready to get mad at you if this is not the case next week. And that's why we love gambling, right? So Browns laying the points. Let's go. In terms of laying points, let's get to the next line here, which you have the Tennessee Titans, who are 8-2 on the season, laying 10.5 points at home to the 1-8 Houston Texans. I have a buddy that always messages me talking about how I love to bet on the Texans, to which I explained to him, I don't think you understand how point spreads work, right? Because, I'm not necessarily betting on the Texans to win games. They're just always double-digit dogs, which is a whole different game. But hey, a lot of points. And maybe I'm still waiting on the regression here from the Titans, but I think this is too many points. And I know I just said that and you convinced me, but
I mean, it is, right? Like it just is like, and it isn't because, if you look at market ratings or even really my power ratings, right? Because with the Titans consistently winning these games, it's limiting how far I can drop them in my ratings, right? Like just from a sort of subjective standpoint, right? Like I can't bring you that far down when you have that sort of intrinsic element where it's like you're pulling games off here, right? Pulling it off. So I can't tell you like, oh, my line's 7 in this game. So like it's a must play at 10. For me, this is purely a situational situation, right? It's a situational situation where, listen, we talked about Cleveland, right? And we didn't mention the embarrassment index, but that's a high embarrassment index game after Cleveland got blown out by the Patriots last week. Well, Tennessee is the least embarrassed team in the league right now. You mentioned the record, right? But they're reeling off victories here hand over fist. And maybe they just show up for this game and they're able to win the game. Like maybe that's all they need to do, right? But again, we talked about it last week going into that Saints game. And, listen, that game was the same sort of catastrophe from a Titans getting every sort of break imaginable to get that 2-touchdown lead, right? But they still weren't good enough to keep Trevor Siemian and company from getting the points that they needed to come back from 2 touchdowns to a point where it was a 2-point conversion game, away from maybe potentially being an overtime game. So all that is to say, like, look at the metrics over the last couple of games. And why are we just using the last couple of games? For obvious reasons. Derrick Henry's absence, right? And I'm going to call out somebody right now because he's not listening, nor is anybody who's associated with him. Your boy Boog, right? Booger McFarland. I was watching PTI yesterday, right? And he's talking about, oh, the Titans don't need to worry because they have Adrian Peterson. And like, oh, they're not missing Derrick Henry because they have Adrian Peterson to threaten defenses. And at which that point I could hear like teams throughout the land in locker rooms all over North America laughing their ass off at this guy. What are you watching? They couldn't salt the game away against the Saints because Adrian Peterson couldn't get any yardage without there being a holding call involved, right? Like, what on earth are you watching if you are saying that Adrian Peterson is like sliding right in there for Derrick Henry? Like, feel free to pick up a stat sheet. Like, we're not talking metrics here. We're talking the most basic stuff imaginable. Like, this team is only putting up like 250 yards of offense per these last two games. Now they've won the game. We give them credit for that. And the defense has improved, but this isn't a top 5 defense, right? The defensive line is excellent. We talked about how they may be neutralized by the Saints offensive line, but the Saints were without Teron Armstead last week and they still got it done. Now, the problem is here, Houston is the team that's coming to town. And can Houston take advantage of all of this? But if you're only going to get 240 yards of offense, again, against pretty good defenses in the Saints and a little bit with the Rams. So obviously the Texans defense is going to make the Titans offense probably look a lot better than it has over the last couple of weeks. Maybe Adrian Peterson looks like the Adrian Peterson of old, and Boog is just sitting there cackling like he knew it, the whole time. But for me here, the Texans come off their bye week. And, a lot has been said this year on like teams coming off their bye week, having not had much success. I couldn't really tell you why that is. It could just be small sample size and kind of a fluke here, but it does give Tyrod Taylor a second week. And we saw that he was turning the ball over and they were turning the ball over hand over fist. The one thing that we know that Tyrod Taylor does not do is turn the ball over, right? That was a highly uncharacteristic game for him against the Dolphins. Even then, they probably should have covered that game. So for me here, I think you're going to get more of the quote unquote real Tyrod Taylor, the sort of more responsible, like the speed of the game adjusted version of Tyrod Taylor. Does that mean the Texans are going to win this outright? Yes. Well, okay, maybe not. No, I do think I am very worried for those survivor folks out there. And again, in my contest and probably in yours, there are 100% of the people have the Titans available to them this week. And this is a very interesting spot for them to play them. But again, this is the opposite of the embarrassment index, right? You're riding high, you're fat and happy. You've got the Patriots next week, obviously a team that you've played in the playoffs a couple of times over the last couple of years. And so like, that's a big game to focus on. You're feeling really good about yourself, but the numbers aren't adding up to where they should be feeling emotionally, right? If they're feeling good or great, right? But the numbers are only meh at this point, that doesn't really add up. And so if the market thinks you're great, and I'm hearing a lot of people talking Super Bowl and all of this sort of stuff, and I'm like, what are you watching over the last couple of weeks? Now, if Derrick Henry comes back, that's a very reasonable opinion to have, but I don't know what's going to happen over this next 6, 7, 8 weeks if they play the way that they have been playing over the last couple of weeks. And so I think this is a situation where people are getting a little too excited for a team that has won a bunch of games in a row, a bunch of big games in a row, who are giving up a ton of points here in this game. To me, like you said, this is too many points. This is not a team that's going to get out to a lead, stretch it, and then just be able to like squash the other team's offense. Maybe the Texans squash themselves here, but I think it's going to be an awfully close game. And maybe something happens here where the Texans actually pull it off. Probably not though.
Hey, to cover big spreads in Tyrod's Texans, I trust.
Oh boy, what could possibly go wrong again? Yeah.
Can't believe I just said that. Let's keep it moving though. 5-5 Colts are at the 6-3 Buffalo Bills. Bills laying 7 points at home. The Colts have been playing really well as of late, and the Bills were not playing as well as of late, but they had a get-right game against the Jets. That's not enough to throw me off the scent. I'm on the points here and the Colts.
Yeah, I get nervous at these games that are like that are 7 and then go to 7.5. Like, it's like, hey, come on in, take the Colts. It's got to be too many points, right? And so I'm not here telling you to grab the Bills here. I've already bet the Colts. I bet the Colts on Monday at plus 7.5 at minus 113. So like that was my buy point when it comes to the Colts. A little bit of a twist here. Carson Wentz, almost called him Carson Palmer. Carson Wentz had a child, I believe his first child this past week. Always a little sketchy if my guy is just not going to have. Can you imagine Carson Wentz on no sleep, by the way? Like the decision making that might come out of that if he just hasn't slept in 3 days. Like, I mean, right? Like that's problematic. But I look at this two ways, right? Like, you mentioned the Bills and like get right game against the Jets, but like, what were they getting right from? A game against the Dolphins, a game, bye week, a game against Washington, a game against Houston. Like they have played the absolute dregs of the league so far this season, right? Like until they had that big show out game against Kansas City. And like, maybe they just save up the good stuff here for Kansas City, for Indianapolis this week. And that might be the case. And certainly that's why they are aligned at 7 to 7.5 points here. But I just look at this and I go, okay, last year's playoff game, a lot of marbles on that table. That line was 6.5, right? And I remember talking about like, everybody being on the Bills that week and go like, if everyone's on the Bills and it's the right side, why isn't this line ever going to 7? Because I was sitting there waiting for it to go to 7 on the Colts. So eventually I had to take the 6.5 with the Colts. They get out to the big lead. The Bills come back, and it's a back and forth game that comes down to like a fumble and late game, just general nonsense, right? So, and they cover, relatively comfortably when all was said and done, right? Even though the Bills moved on and won the game. So what's different from these two teams from then? Like the only thing that's different is Carson Wentz is in for Phillip Rivers. Now, listen, nobody's a bigger Phillip Rivers fan than I am, but even I understand sort of the foibles of Phillip and the idea that maybe Carson Wentz is just a junior version of Phillip Rivers, where it's going to look great a lot of the time. And if there's weapons around him, he can make all the throws. And obviously Carson Wentz a lot more mobile, but there's also going to be some decision-making in there that just drives you insane, right? Red zone interceptions and just throw it up and hope for the best type plays. Both those guys are cut from the same cloth. But does that change anything with the point spread for me? No. So like, I kind of think this game should be 6.5, the same way it was in that playoff game last year. Now, does that mean the same thing is going to happen and the same result is going to happen? No, of course not. But I think the Colts are actually a little bit better at the other positions, not because they've necessarily changed guys, but because those guys have gotten a little bit better, right? Michael Pittman has taken a step forward, right? Jonathan Taylor is now like a clear cut sort of top 5 running back in the league. And we don't make these decisions off of, skill position players that are replaceable. But think about this. T.Y. Hilton is back and should play in this game. We talk about him as the field stretcher, right? And so this is, the Bills having played the JV of the league, right? Junior varsity the whole way. And now they get to play an actual team here. Now, on any given week, we can see, the Colts, are they an actual good team or are they just the JV of the league masquerading as a potentially good team, right? The defense is pretty shoddy. So I think there's some very real chance here for a shootout type of a thing here. And it's different than the 2.5 points, right? It's, we're getting 7.5 in a shootout. So that's, that back door is always open in that instance here. So I like the Colts in this one. Try to get the plus 7.5, even if you have to pay a couple of extra dollars, nothing higher than like a minus 115. You should be able to get that right now, hopefully, depending on where the line is when you listen to this. But at some point over the weekend, this to me is Colts plus 7.5. And if the Bills have that game, right, where they just look awesome, then I'm willing to tip my cap that they can just play down to competition or just sort of, phone it in against some of these bad teams and then bring it against some of these better teams in the league.
Oh, Carson Wentz. I feel like somehow my weeks, every single week, I'm always just sitting here relying on Carson Wentz somehow, some way. It's almost like I'm a Carson Wentz fan. I don't get it, how this happens to me, but here we are. The 6-3 Ravens, 4.5 point road favorites at the 3-6 Chicago Bears. This game nicely in the Vegas zone. To be honest, is this just an overreaction to what happened to the Ravens last week? Like, how is this number at 4.5? I feel like it should be higher. Am I wrong here? Where's the line movement?
You're not wrong. And it's why we want to talk about this game here, not because it's necessarily a best bet in sort of traditional, like, stamp it, however you want to, whatever it. It's a game that just needs to be talked about here because the market rating and my numbers come out to like 8 for the Ravens here. right?
Okay.
Like, the market's 8. I'm, I think, like 7.2, something along those lines. I don't have it written down in front of me. Because you look at it this way, you go, okay, like, are the Bears, what's the difference between the Bears and the Dolphins at this point, right? Like, kind of isn't one, right? Like two teams that, like, from a branding standpoint, you think have good defenses, but in the case of the Bears, right, half of those guys are out every single week. Doesn't really appear like they're going to be ready to go this week. And offense is manned by young quarterbacks who are, ready to make a bad decision at any given time here, with kind of shaky weapons on the outside. Allen Robinson didn't practice yesterday, right? And it's like, well, what's left at that point? Allen Robinson's not even having that great of a year here, right? And so not having a good year at all, really, I would dare say a bad year. So the point is like, what's the difference between the Dolphins and the Bears? Is it just because the Dolphins pulled that game out last week? Well, like, let's go back to that game, right? Like that game's 6-3 for the vast majority of that game. And there were still various points of the game where you thought the Ravens were just going to flip the switch, win that game, and maybe even do so pulling away in the second half. And so I look at it and I go, okay, well, what is going on with this line? Why did it open at 6 and why did it drop to 4.5? And the simple answer is Lamar Jackson's got some sort of illness and has been out of practice the last couple of days. Marquise Hollywood Brown has a thigh injury. There's some illness also with some other guys on the team. And you go, okay, is that what's pulling this down? Because we want to keep it in this no man's land, the aforementioned Vegas zone that you refer to, right? And if you can put it in the reason the Vegas zone is because it's not committed to 6 and it's not committed to 3. It lands somewhere in between, right? And so if Lamar Jackson's out of this game, if he's in this game and everything's healthy, this number has to be 7, 7.5, or 8, as I sort of discussed. If he's not in this game, how many points does that matter, right? Do the Bears become favored if Lamar Jackson's out of this game, right? The drop off to the backup quarterback, if you will, right? I don't know that the Bears are going to be favored necessarily. Like, it's probably something along the lines of like Ravens -2, 2.5. And so this line is sitting here at 4.5, just kind of ready, right? It's like, watch your man and the ball. You're kind of like halfway in between going like, all right, where do we go? Where do we go? I'm ready for anything here. Am I help defense? Am I staying with the shooter? Like, this is the situation that we're at with 4.5. So you can't make a bet, as valuable as it seems right now to make a bet on the Ravens, right? It should be a best bet at -4.5 with this number that should be over 7. That should be best bet quality, right? Like, boom, hit it. And I don't think that Lamar Jackson's going to miss this game. So part of me wants to get a little tiptoe, right? Get a little taste, right, of it right now. But you would feel uncomfortable if all of a sudden Lamar Jackson couldn't go in this game, and then you're paying the -4.5 for a game that's probably going to be a lot closer to pick 'em than it is right now. So this is definitely a be careful with what you want to do here type of a game. It's an injury report game, right? Like, the Ravens could get healthier or they could get less healthy, and the Bears could get healthy all of a sudden, right? With Akeem Nicks and help me out here, Khalil Mack, those types of players that haven't been in the lineup for a couple of weeks, right? And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty because they just had their bye week. So we don't really know where these guys are who were allegedly questionable 2 weeks ago. So a lot happening with this game, and that's why it's worth mentioning. Should be a best bet on Baltimore, but we just can't pull the trigger just yet here.
So a team that, you convinced me to pull the trigger on last week is my San Francisco 49ers, who are at 4-5 on the season and somehow find themselves as 6.5-point road favorites against 2-7 Jags. And hey, you convinced me last week that things were good. They're going to win against the Rams, but I'm not going to be here laying 6.5 points on the road with Jimmy G versus anybody. That's just me. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, all-time spot type of a play here, right? Like, San Francisco circle the wagons, right? They're not the Bills, but they're, Chris Berman's other favorite team. They circled the wagons last week, right? And they came out and we talked about the matchup. We've beaten that thing, to death in patting ourselves on the back. But as I alluded to on Tuesday's show, right? Like, the other sort of shoe here, I think, is potentially going to drop as this team that we didn't, I say we as in the market, not you and I, but the vast majority of people, right? The 80% of people that were betting on the Rams here were not giving the 49ers any chance last week. that team still exists, right? Like they are still that team that at times deserves that sort of, shade, if you will. And now they go cross country, short week, 1:00 start time, like all of this sort of cliche elements, right? And they play this Jacksonville team. And again, it's Jacksonville, right? 2 wins all season, like they're terrible, Urban Meyer jokes, yada, yada, yada. The key to me here is we need James Robinson to play in this game. And if he plays in this game, there it is. Yep. There it is, Shell. It's the alert. It's the red light special. If James Robinson plays in this game, I think the Jags are live to win this game. And at plus 250, plus two, anything higher than plus 200 here on the money line are a very reasonable bet here. Because if James Robinson plays in this game, look at it this way, right? So they go on the road to London. They get that victory in London, right, against the Dolphins. That very close game, like total roller coaster ride. They come back and they have their bye week, right? And they come out and they play. They have that big loss against Seattle where we all kind of thought we're like, I think they could beat Seattle. Like Geno Smith, the money was coming in on the Jags there hand over fist. That was a relatively short line. It got really disappointing really quick, right? But part of that was because James Robinson went out of that game after just 4 carries. But if you look at their offense, since they figured out that James Robinson was on the team, like remember everybody was making those jokes in the first 3 weeks, like where's James Robinson, right? Like not even just the first 3 weeks, back to like the draft, right? Where they're drafting Travis Etienne from Clemson. It's like, you've got one of the best running backs in the league on your team already. You've got a billion holes. Why are you drafting this guy? So clearly they didn't even realize what they had, which again is really depressing from a personnel management standpoint for the Jags. Point is, they finally figure out that James Robinson's really good. If you look at their yards per play numbers, right, the absolute core numbers for an offense, they're actually above 6 in every game that James Robinson has played a meaningful role in, right? Whether it was the Cincinnati game, even the Tennessee game where they lost and didn't cover, right? There was some sort of chicanery on why they didn't necessarily cover that game. But the only game on that list was the Seahawks game where they were 4.5, right? And league average, by the way, is about 5.5 yards per play on offense as a frame of reference, right? So if you're in the 6s consistently, you actually suddenly have an above average offense, right? Yeah. Like even with Trevor Lawrence and some turnovers, and obviously thankfully for us and Survivor, the fumble last week to end that game. But for all of that stuff happening, the offense is still absolutely getting the ball down the field here. And then you look at the defense and over the last few games, right? Like they shut down the Bills and outside of the Colts. And again, we got fortunate from that Colts game standpoint in that we got up 17-0 early. 7 of those points were on a punt block touchdown, right? The Colts had 1 touchdown in that game. So against the Colts and the Bills, the last 2 weeks, the Jags have given up 1 offensive touchdown. Frisky. That's not bad. That is frisky, right? That is frisk levels, high levels of frisk. And so now you've got this 49ers team, good offense. Okay, but so did the Bills, right? So did the Colts. So, okay, maybe they give up 2 touchdowns in this game. Maybe they give up 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals. Maybe they give up 20 points to the 49ers. How many points can the Jags get on their side of the ball? And if you're clicking along here at 6 yards per play, the answer to that is probably in the 20s as well. So I think they're very live to win this game. I grabbed a little, again, it's a situation. This is, rule of thumb. If the line is 6.5, give it a minute, right? Give it a day or two. That's why we have 7 days between these games. Give it some time. Maybe they'll be, and monitor it obviously, but maybe there'll be a 7, right? Maybe you have to pay a couple of extra bucks. Maybe it's a minus 115, a minus 116, something like that. But if that 7 is there, that 3 is there for a relatively cheap price, grab that. But I like them with 6.5 here. I like them with 6. I like them on the money line. It's absolutely the red light special this week. I think the Jags, for all the jokes that we make about Urban Meyer, what if after 5 or 6 games with a relatively historically successful head coach, that this team has shown improvement with a rookie quarterback, right? What if Urban Meyer isn't a blithering idiot, right? What if Trevor Lawrence isn't terrible? What if it just took both of those guys half a dozen, half a season, right? That X amount of games to kind of get it figured out a little bit, right? The defense gets a little healthier. They start figuring out what their defense is good at, because defenses, offenses, they could be good at a lot of different stuff. That's what's fun about the NFL, right? You have all of these different teams that play different styles. The Jags might not have known what style was best for their defense. Are they a heavy blitz team? Are they a not blitz at all team, right? Can you rely on Josh Allen to get, pressure on the quarterback all the time? Where do we use Miles Jack, right? All of these different things. Maybe the coaching staff actually figures out over the course of 8 games. Maybe the game slows down for Trevor Lawrence. And that's the indicators that we have to look for in these last few games. And they're pretty clear when the defense is only giving up 1 touchdown in the last 2 games, and the offense with James Robinson, when they were running the football. And again, against the Colts, they weren't able to have that game script because they were down 17-0, and they still almost came back. So there's a lot to like, as crazy as it is to sound. There's a lot to hear. There's a lot to like about this Jags team. And I think that they surprised this weekend against the 49ers.
All right. The Jags. I mean, sure. Shanahan, I'm not throwing off the scent just yet. I'm just not. I'm sorry, Shanahan. But before we get to a Sunday night matchup here, I want to give a little reminder of the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drfsports.com to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. So again, make sure you sign up for the Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. And also check out our guy Scott Grambling's weekly 6-pack, which you can find on YouTube. Gives you in-depth previews as well. All of this you can find drf.com/sports. Bottom line, we got you covered however you want your betting information. But as mentioned, we're talking about a Sunday nighter. The 5-3-1 Pittsburgh Steelers are at the 5-4 Chargers. I almost called them San Diego. The Chargers are favored by 6 points. This is a lot of points. And I have not been one to want to lay points as of late. But I'm going to just say that this might be a fate of the Steelers here for me. And I know I've been trying to stay disciplined, Matt. I've been trying to stay disciplined.
Sure.
But there's nothing about the Steelers that makes me want to sit there and be like, oh yeah, I trust this team to do anything.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I was right there with you, right? Like I was like, oh my God, the Chargers are going to be a play for me. Like I was looking at my numbers and it's like, it was off the charts. It was like, it was one where like, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me here. But like, I don't know. Every time we watch the Steelers, it's disappointing, right? Like, so why wouldn't my rating for them drop? And maybe I'm the last one to kind of give up here on this Chargers team, but like my rating's still pretty high on the Chargers here. And so like I had this number like coming out to, and this is, obviously sort of the Mason Rudolph version of the Steelers here, but my number was coming out to like 8 on the Chargers, because again, that's Mason Rudolph. And like, again, I referenced the 50 attempts and the no touches from Detroit. And so fundamentally I was like, well, he's going to get hit this week. He's going to get pressure this week. And then what comes rolling down the news? Joey Bosa. Right? COVID, he's potentially out. Like, I don't know what the situation is as far as like, okay, now, you got to do the whole past 2 test things. Is he vaccinated? Is he not vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. And then same sort of deal, right? Where we get Jerry Tillery, defensive tackle from Notre Dame, right? Like big time prospect, big time player, big time draft pick, not a household name necessarily, but we're talking about 2 guys on the defensive line here that were going to take advantage of the Steelers offensive line. Right. And pressure Mason Rudolph. Now I keep saying Mason Rudolph here because it doesn't seem like Ben Roethlisberger is going to play in this game. And I don't really understand what's going on with that either, because I was on the assumption that was just a 1-week thing. Now, the thing is for him, he self-reported symptoms last Saturday. Yeah. So like, that's different than not passing the test, right? Or being asymptomatic like an Aaron Rodgers or somebody else. So maybe he's just deep into it right now. And maybe that's why we haven't, heard or seen anything from Ben Roethlisberger. Maybe he comes out on Friday after you've listened to this podcast or before you've listened to this podcast and you're sitting and you're going like, yeah, no, he's good to go. Right. And so for me, if that happens, the number goes down to 3.5. But again, you still have the issues on the Chargers defense. Right. And so there's just so many moving parts to this. Now, the one thing I'll say is like, and this is sort of inside the beltway here as well, but like the line right now for the big contest in Las Vegas is 6.5. And what that indicates is that's what their expectation of where the line is going to close is, right? So it could be 5.5 at your book right now. It could be 6, right? Which isn't a massive difference necessarily from 6.5. Though 6 is a relatively key number, but it just goes to show like their information and what they believe in this game is that the Chargers should be favored by a little bit more than they might be right this second, which says to me, maybe Bosa's able to come back. Maybe Tillery's able to come back. You know, Drew Tranquil is also the safety. He's also in the mix as far as that COVID situation is concerned. And then it also means maybe Ben Roethlisberger isn't going to play, but it's the Chargers. So you always have to worry about just chicanery, Duck Hodges, you know, pulling out victories, the defense. To me, it needs to be mentioned. TJ Watt obviously went out with a hip, leg, knee type deal last week. Seems like he's going to be okay. But is he going to be okay enough to play in this game? Because if he's not, right, we talk about like, what are you afraid of from the Steelers? It's literally TJ Watt, right? Like it's whether it's him making the play or him doing stuff that allows somebody else on the team to make a play, because we're not afraid of the secondary. We're not really afraid of anything other than TJ Watt just causing absolute havoc. Last thing, Slater, the rookie tackle for the Chargers, has like a historically good pass win blocking rate as a rookie, right? Like gives up a pressure like 1 out of 28 times, something along those lines, right? So you're getting, you know, a sneaky good offensive line here with the Chargers that nobody's talking about. And listen, you don't want anybody talking about your offensive line, right? It's like a referee. Like if they just go nameless and faceless, that's the idea, right? Because if they're getting shown on camera, it's usually because they're either getting beat or they are holding someone, right? And so if you've never heard of Slater, that's good news for him. And so if it's no Watt, the offensive line for the Chargers here can dominate, which means you're going to get Justin Herbert scoring a lot of points and throwing the ball downfield on this Steelers secondary. And I think that's where you get this game being able to be stretched out. And you've got Mason Rudolph unable to stay in touch with this game, right? So I think this has very real possibility of like a 28-13 type of a game here on Sunday night. I just need to know what pieces are available, whether it's COVID related or injury related, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bit of a mess, but that's where I stand.
Very interesting. I like it. I like it a lot. I'm interested to hear your take though on this next game, because you got the 3-6 Giants at the 6-3 Bucks. Bucks are laying 11 points. And I know that there's this weird thing about the Giants playing better on the road.
Yeah.
I feel like I need some more information though on who's in the lineup for the Bucks before I think about laying the points. This is another one of these situations where I need you to convince me to lay the points here, because I want to do it, but I need you to convince me here to lay the points. And also, is this a Survivor type vibe here?
I was going to say, I don't know that I can come out and tell you anything about this, because we are at this point so clouded by the Survivor contest at this point, right? 173 people entries left out of 4,080 in the large Survivor contest in Las Vegas, right? Like we are in the mix. So whenever we get to a big spread, hopefully a big spread game each week, obviously that's not necessarily a guarantee on every single week, especially as we run out of teams here. But when we get to these big spread games, and I just need Tampa Bay to win, because yes, they are the Survivor play this week, because I do not have faith in the Tennessee Titans. One of my rules, right, is get a team when they are at their best, when you can expect them to be at their best, whether it's health or motivation, right? Tampa Bay here has lost 2 straight games and had the bye week in between. Like this is a team, you know, Bruce Arians calling out Tom Brady, calling out the team for being dumb. You know what that is, right? That's coach speak. That's coach speak, trying to light a fire under these guys, get a little focus, a little, you know, instead of complacency where you assume you're going to beat the Washington football team, you assume that you're going to beat the Saints. Like, let's get a little gumption here, right? And I don't think we see Antonio Brown necessarily in this game. He might be headed straight to the federal prison for faking, you know, COVID vaccination cards. Who knows what's going on with that guy? It's a never-ending cycle. We talk about how he's the most important person on that offense. We talk about how Vita Vea, I don't know if we do talk about this, but Vita Vea is one of the most important players on the defense, right? He's the reason nobody can run on that team. So yes, it would be really nice. It'd be really great if both of those guys played, but it'd be really nice if at least Vea played so that we could be able to, understand how the Giants offense is going to work or not work against the Bucs. But to me, this is a focus spot for Tampa Bay, whereas, referencing Tennessee, it's a spot where they might not be super locked in, and that's when you get vulnerable to an upset here. So I would be shocked if Tampa Bay loses a Monday night home game. I'm happy to put my faith in Tom Brady to get it done. If it does get a little bit dicey later on in the game, hopefully it doesn't come to that. But from a point spread standpoint, I get it, right? There's some injury issues with Tampa. In theory, the Giants are going to be as healthy as they have been all year. There's some Saquon Barkley return vibes, if you will. And all of that stuff can be a little bit scary. And that's why I would probably, if I could take myself out of this world, which to be truthful, I can't, I would probably just take the points with the Giants here. But this is a spot where if the Bucs win easy and win comfortably, you would sit there and be like, yeah, of course they did, because it was time to get after it, right? It was time to hammer some team, whoever's coming to town here on a Monday night. Now, hopefully Tom Brady can push his bedtime back and we don't have to worry about that, right? We're worried about all these sort of weirdish things with the Bucs, not winning this game, but fundamentally they're an 11 and a half point favorite here. That's the pick for Survivor. Point spread wise, the good news is, if you will, I don't have to deal with it. And I just sort of refuse to in this situation because of how serious we are here, week 11 in Survivor, with it coming down to the nitty gritty.
Well, you speak of things getting serious, and I feel like things are getting serious in the NCAA as well. And I kind of want to switch gears here and focus in there because, big games as always on the Saturday sched, but what has your focus here as we look at some of the big boy matchups?
Yeah, I've got 4 sort of big games that I'm interested in. Unfortunately, you know how it works, right? Big team plays team that we think is pretty decent, and maybe they could upset them if we didn't know, how point spreads or betting markets worked. Then we look at the point spread and we see Ohio State is again 19-point favorites against Michigan State. Now, you and I both have tickets to KenFest, #KenFest 2021, right? In New York for the Heisman, right? Kenny Pickett and Kenneth Walker, hopefully both are there. This is obviously a big game for him. Do they need to win this game for him to be, still considered a Heisman candidate? No, but my main focus is let's get Kenneth Walker some run out there. Let's get Walker some run. If we could get 100 yards, maybe a couple of touchdowns, I don't really care if they lose this game 49-20, Purdue style last week, where we talked about that being this Purdue's frisky. And then it's no, actually Ohio State's just going to truck them. So I imagine Ohio State probably trucks Michigan State as well. To me, my investment is in this game that Kenneth Walker plays really well. Meanwhile, you got Alabama, right? And they're 1 win away or some other loss away from clinching that spot in the SEC championship. Obviously, the road is paved. They don't necessarily need to worry. They are 20-point home favorites against Arkansas. Yeah. However, I think there's enough talent on Arkansas here. And we've talked about how Alabama is a little overrated, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I think Arkansas stays within the 20 points in this game, right? Because they have that offense where it's dual threat, big quarterback who can run the football, get short yardage conversions on 3rd down, right? A lot of teams, when they get to 3rd and 2, it's all right, we're going to run a slant here against the Bama defense. And somebody's going to break that play up one way or another, right? Whereas if you have a quarterback like Jefferson, who can just tuck it and get those extra yards, just put his shoulders into somebody and actually go forward, that extends a couple of drives, that takes some time off the clock. And there's also explosive players on Arkansas and some good defensive players. They're going to be able to keep this game tight the same way that LSU was able to a couple of weeks ago. Now, obviously, offensively, LSU and Arkansas play a lot differently. And that's why I think, I'm not going to say Arkansas is alive to win this game. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I just think that this game could be interesting in the 3rd quarter. And when we're getting 20 points here, that's kind of all we ask. And hopefully Alabama just kind of gets out of Dodge there with the Iron Bowl set for next week, right? Alabama had their sort of cushy beat up on New Mexico State performance last week. This is one where it's let's just win, and then we can get in the Iron Bowl, we can win that, and then then we have to deal with Georgia, right? There's no real reason for them to be super sharp or to run up the score late against Arkansas, even if they get that opportunity, which I'm not necessarily sure that they do. The 2 games that are going to be competitive, right, are college football playoff adjacent type games. Wake Forest sitting there at number 10, but have an opportunity to be an ACC champion with one loss. And the way the season's going, where teams are losing games left and right, maybe an ACC champion with one loss, even if their name is Wake Forest, might be good enough to get into the playoff, because clearly nobody wants Cincinnati in that room to make this playoff, right? And so Wake Forest here is an underdog on the road to Clemson. Now, again, we know how bad Clemson has been this season. It is, to me, I don't want to say absurd necessarily, because if this game is played in September, it would be a 3-touchdown spread for Clemson before we found out that Clemson's not very good. It's 4.5 in favor of Clemson. So Wake Forest is sitting there going like, we get no respect. And I kind of get it, right? Like, you're barely beating NC State. You're losing to North Carolina. Like, you're still in the middle of the ACC, only your record makes it look like you're at the top of the ACC. So I know that we're supposed to bet on Clemson here, right? Like, it's telling you they're 4.5-point favorites. They're going to win this by a touchdown. Like, this is Dabo's like revenge on the season, even though he's, they're likely not going to make the ACC championship game. I think I'm still just going to take Wake Forest just for the content. Right. Okay. Give me the plus 4.5. Like, Clemson, they've covered 2 games this year, and they were both the flukiest covers ever. Right. Like, they should be 0 for the season against the spread. So, like, I'm not ready to back Clemson and Dabo, even though their offense probably looks as good as it does all year this week, because Wake Forest defense isn't very good. But again, I trust Sam Hartman to keep this game relatively close. And I think this is probably going to be sort of a 23-24-20 type of game either way. So I'm going to take Wake Forest in that game. And then the last one, the nightcap, Oregon, right? For all of the Oregon's ranked in the top 4, they're underdogs this week at Utah. And I know a lot of people are going like, okay, like, they should be, and maybe the line should be 1. Like, I made the line 1 for Utah. And so you're saying, well, like, doesn't that mean there's value on Oregon? This is sort of like a reverse psychology type of a game. Right? Like, this is one where it's like, yeah, I know I'm not getting value on Utah, but I think the line is telling me who I'm supposed to bet on here. Right? Like, there's a reason that this is shaded too high, because we're all sitting around and saying that the line should be lower than this. Right. Yeah. And so everybody just piles in here on Oregon plus 3. It'll be interesting to see what the line move on this game is. Right? If the line moves down to 2.5, I would actually be more worried about it, even though I'd be getting the better number, because I might be like, oh, everyone's right. We should be betting on Oregon. And like, that's why the line's moving, to get more Utah money. But like, if this just stays at -3 and the books just allow Oregon money to pour in, like, that's a real big indicator for me that they're just okay with sort of seeing how this game plays out. And Oregon doesn't have the offense that they sort of historically have, the way that you think of Oregon. That's not how they play. They are a defense-oriented team, which leaves them open to a couple of big plays, changing a game in its entirety, right? And Kayvon Thibodeau is probably going to go number 1 in the draft, again, until we start getting, drinking the Kool-Aid on some random quarterback going number 1. Kayvon Thibodeau, the defensive end, is the best player in college football, or the best pro prospect in college football. He's going up against an offensive line with Utah that's pretty good, right? Like, their tackles are pretty good. They're also NFL level type players, in their own right, if you will. Okay. So this is the first of what's going to be a rematch in the Pac-12 championship game. Unfortunately, I think for Oregon, the sort of college football playoff dreams die this weekend in Salt Lake City. I like Utah minus the 3.
Woo. Okay. Utah, the Utes. Let's keep things going with the hurry up offense. The music's kicking in. The Utes are hype. Everyone's hype as the music's playing.
Don't watch the YouTube version.
I'm just going to step aside and, let you cook, my dude, as always.
Yeah, let's go. And again, getting down to late part of the season, right? Let's take it down. 19 games is too many games. So I'm putting the games down. Guess how many games we've got? We've got 19 games. 3 on Friday. 3 on Friday. I thought I had a low number because I didn't have as many games on Saturday. And then I looked up and I was like, oh God, I have 3 Friday games too. All right, here we go. Nevada -2. I'm all over that on Friday. Memphis +8.5 against Houston. I'm all over that. The one I like most, and I hate to say it because it's our guy, Jaden DeLora and the Washington State Cougars, right? They believed, they were fighting, they were clawing. They got in through the back door for a push last week against Oregon. And I think this is the letdown. I think this is the situation where it's like, oh, we gave it our best. We were now out of contention for the Pac-12 championship. They actually had a chance if they beat Oregon to get into that title game. Now they don't. They've got the Apple Cup on Friday against Washington. Obviously, that's going to get their attention as Washington is an absolute dumpster fire. Hold on that team. We'll talk about them in a second. So this is just a spot where it's like Arizona, they're not very good, but they're playing a little bit better, right? They hung around with Utah last week, and which was obviously a look-ahead spot for Utah with the game that we just mentioned on deck. And so Arizona plus 15, we are fading Washington State, our Cougs. Sorry, Cougs, you know, we had a good run together, but we're going to have to sort of separate here. We'll be back probably on Friday on the Cougs there. As we go down here, Saturday's games, Iowa State and Oklahoma. Obviously, the last we saw Oklahoma, really ugly offensive performance on the road at Baylor. They are home now to Iowa State, and this number's down to 3.5. I'll be the sucker to jump back on Oklahoma at minus 3.5. All Iowa State to me has done is disappoint in big games, right? Whether it's losing to Iowa, whether it's losing to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game last year, right? And then getting upset in other different, sort of spots throughout the season. I don't know why we're selling on Oklahoma just because they didn't do well on the road against Baylor. Again, either one of those quarterbacks I think has more success this week. I imagine it's going to be Caleb Williams, of course. He got his hand stepped on. Hopefully his hand is fine after that game. Give me Oklahoma minus 3.5. Maybe this even goes down to 3. That would be insane to me. Rutgers. Let's bet on some Rutgers football. Rutgers plus 17 against Penn State. We get into this part of the season where it's like, okay, what were your goals? Did you cross off all those goals? Did you, are any of those goals still available to you? Penn State has no more goals, right? They are out of goals. They are bowl qualified. They are not going to make it to a New Year's Six bowl game. They are not going to make it to the Big Ten championship game. They lost to Michigan last week in that devastating, long touchdown that they gave up late. That was a bummer for us who happened to be on Penn State plus 3. They lose by 4. Now they've got this home game against Rutgers. Rutgers, again, you're not getting up for Rutgers, right? You're just not. Rutgers still needs another win. I'm not saying they get it this week, but they need another win to get bowl eligible, right? Like that's their goal this season. Now, do you want to wait for the last game next week against Maryland to become bowl eligible? Yeah, that's the backup plan here, right? But you're going to be focused. They just came off a dominant road victory against Indiana, admittedly, but still, right? The vibes are pretty good for Rutgers right now, and we're getting 17 points. So I think we're getting heavy effort from Rutgers. I don't know how much effort we're getting out of Penn State, especially with James Franklin taking calls from any team that he can possibly get a phone number for. I'm taking Rutgers in this game. I'm going to speed it up, I promise. Florida Atlantic plus 10.5 at Western Kentucky. This is the game for Florida Atlantic, right? Like this is their chance to actually make an imprint on this season. We've been waiting for them to do something here. Western Kentucky, we like as an underdog going up against Power 5 teams because they have Bailey Zappi and the offense, right? But 10.5 here is a little too much for a Florida Atlantic team that can play a little defense. Give me Florida Atlantic plus 10.5. Speaking of Florida's, Florida State and Boston College. I wrote this preview at the start of the year for the Score about win totals and the idea, for goals, if you have a 5.5, just take the over because these teams are going to want to get to bowl eligibility. If you have a 6.5, take the under because once they get to bowl eligibility, they are sort of set, right? Same sort of concept that we just talked about with a couple of these other teams. Well, in that column, I wrote that Florida State and Boston College were eligible for bets on those win totals, but it's probably just going to come down to this Florida State-Boston College game, and we might as well just wait and just bet that game because if we've got Florida State over and Boston College under, we're going to need Florida State to beat Boston College at the end of November anyway. Well, here we are. We need Florida State to beat Boston College anyway. This is that sort of spot. We're getting 2 points here for Florida State. Unfortunately, or however you look at it, they had a dramatic win against rival Miami last week. I still think they get it done against Boston College, right? We sort of signed up for this back in August. Florida State plus 2. Cincinnati. They haven't been on the list here for a while. Cincinnati minus 11.5. I'm going with SMU here, right? Cincinnati, and this is pretty basic stuff. Cincinnati hasn't covered against mediocre to bad competition. So why would they start covering now? Now the number's a little bit lower than the 20s that they've been playing in against the Tulsas and Tulanes of the world. But SMU got back to right last week against UCF. That was a team. That's a team that can score. They could score before last week, and they scored last week. I think they're going to score this week just enough to stay in this game and maybe shock Cincinnati here at Kippert Stadium in Cincinnati. I kind of like SMU on a little money line sprinkle here as well. Syracuse and North Carolina State. North Carolina State 11.5-point favorites here against a Syracuse team that just got blown out by Louisville. By the way, shout out to Louisville for making me not regret passing on Duke plus 21 last night as Louisville hung like 60 on Duke, as we sort of thought that they might last night. Louisville pounded Syracuse. North Carolina State can do the same thing. They can do just enough offensively to clear this number, because I don't know that Syracuse is even going to score against North Carolina State's defense. So we're going to lay the 11.5 with North Carolina State. We're going to take the 12 with Illinois against Iowa. Iowa, we were on them as a favorite last week. They were a 4.5-point favorite, and it was a miserable experience, even in victory. They won the game, they covered the game, but it was only because of some janky game script at the end where there was timeouts still available and they had to kick a field goal to go from a 2-point win to a 5-point win. I don't know how you take Iowa minus 12. So that means I got to take Illinois plus the 12, right? This is a team that can run the football, right? They can hang in this game. Iowa just isn't a team that can stretch and pull away. Hopefully Illinois doesn't do any crazy turnover type BS where Iowa's able to stretch the game that way. Washington and Colorado. Speaking of the Washington Huskies, it was a scene last week in the Arizona State game. Now Washington goes on the road. We mentioned the Apple Cup coming on Friday. This is a weird game for Washington too, where they go on the road against Colorado. Why would they care necessarily about this game? If Washington was good, I would be like, yeah, okay, like they can beat Colorado, because a lot of teams can easily beat Colorado because Colorado doesn't have much in the way of defense. Washington doesn't have much in the way of offense, so it's probably going to be less of an issue. Give me Colorado plus 6.5. Also a money line shot here with the Buffaloes, because what does Washington have to play for other than their in-state rival game on Friday? Classic look-ahead spot. They want nothing to do with going to the Mile High City. Virginia and Pittsburgh, quick note here, right? Last week we talked about this game and we needed Brennan Armstrong to play against Notre Dame to take the 5.5 points. Again, this is all you need to know about reading the market and watching point spreads. The line goes up all through Saturday, goes through 7, goes to 7.5. And it's like, why do you think that is? Somebody out there knows Brennan Armstrong's not going to play. Sure enough, 20 minutes before the game, he gets announced out, and you go, okay, that's why I was waiting. That's why I didn't bet this game until we had more information, because guess what? Star quarterbacks matter. Fast forward to Virginia scoring 3 points against Notre Dame. The high-flying Virginia offense needs its conductor. If they get their conductor this week, 14.5 points is way too many points against Pitt with Brennan Armstrong at QB for Virginia. As much as we like our guy, hashtag KenFest 2021, as much as we like our guy Kenny Pickett, right? That's too many points. Now, you would say, is it too many points because Brennan Armstrong isn't going to play? This is a game for the ACC division here. This is a game to get into the driver's seat for the title game. Virginia is right there. It's why they sat Armstrong out against Notre Dame, because that wasn't a conference game. So to me, I think Armstrong plays in this game, and we're getting 2 touchdowns. Now, it'll be interesting to see when he gets announced in where this line goes. If it's still in the double digits and you want to wait, and it's still the double digits, I would take Virginia here every single day, twice on Saturdays, but only really bet them once. Michigan and Maryland. Michigan gets the big win against Penn State. This is sort of fundamental college kids, right? They get the big win against Penn State. They have the big game against Ohio State next week. In between, they go to Maryland as 14.5-point favorites. This has sort of sleepwalking through it type of situation written all over it. Maryland can score with the younger Tagovailoa brother. 14.5 is too many points here. We're going to take Maryland plus the 14.5. I promise. I'm going to speed it up. UAB and UTSA, Conference USA division matchup to see who can get into the Conference USA title game. This is the biggest game in San Antonio history since David Robinson and Tim Duncan were involved. UTSA -4.5 here against UAB. ECU, our guy, Holton Ahlers. Holton Ahlers' season is November. It's not the season of Navy. That defense is terrible. He's going to be able to rack up points here. We're going to take the road favorite in ECU -4. Kansas back to the well after the big win. Sounds like a dumb thing to do, but 22 points for TCU is way too many. Let's take Kansas in that game. South Carolina and Auburn. Bo Nix out for the season. I think there's an over-adjustment to this line here. I think they're going to be just fine against a frankly pretty bad South Carolina team. I'm going to take Auburn -7.5 just on the strength of literally every other position on Auburn and that the quarterbacking isn't going to be that bad. Speaking of bad quarterbacking and bad offense, USC, again, no Drake London. He's their offense. UCLA, even at the best of times, is going to be able to run that ball down USC's throat. I don't care that it's across town at the Memorial Coliseum here. UCLA -3 on the road, still in the same city at USC. And then finally, arguably, again, I don't know how it always ends up, but the last game of the night is my favorite game. Oregon State's going to beat Arizona State. We're getting 3 points with Oregon State. Arizona State should have lost to that garbage Washington team last week that can't score. Oregon State absolutely can score. Probably a high-scoring, bigger shootout type of the game here. But give me Oregon State plus the points, and we're going to throw that into the money line as well. And there it is, brother. That is your hurry-up offense, finally.
Woo, woo, wow. Lots of games. And it's funny because we got to enjoy this while we can, because there's only a certain amount of weeks left in college football action the way that we like it when there's so many games for us to play. But before we go, NCAA basketball is here, and we got a couple picks there as well, I'm told. Hold on, the producer's in my ear telling me, hold on, we got a couple more picks.
Awesome. Listen, we're getting to almost feast week, right? Where it's like neutral site, rando tournaments. We don't even know who's going to match up against who. This isn't that. This is a neutral site. You know, if you're in the Connecticut area, you want to swing through the Mohegan Sun, you're going to play a little craps, maybe a little blackjack, and you're going to watch a doubleheader of Villanova, Tennessee, and UNC and Purdue. Little neutral site basketball. I don't even know. It's probably going to be in like a conference hall, right? They're having some sort of insurance convention there next week, I'm sure, something along those lines. Villanova and Tennessee, UNC and Purdue. Honestly, just fundamentally 2 games that you just want to watch because both of these teams, or sort of both of these games, are involving really good teams. Villanova, we saw last week against UCLA, probably should have won that game in regulation on the road at UCLA. So I'm going to be looking to lay the points here with Villanova. I imagine the line probably close to where it was last week in sort of a reverse way, where Villanova is maybe going to be a 4.5 point favorite here. Give me Villanova. And then UNC Purdue, always exciting my guy, Jaden Ivey, right? Ja Morant Jr., if you will. I'm looking forward to watching that game. I would lay the points there as long as it's under like 6 for Purdue in that game. So a couple of favorites on a neutral site because I think Villanova is a little more polished than Tennessee is right this second. And the same thing with Purdue, their size and just the general awesomeness of Jaden Ivey gets me fired up about Purdue. We'll see long-term whether that team actually is as good as we hope that they're going to be with all of the guys that they have on that team. But we get our first look at all of these teams, with the exception of Villanova. Obviously, we saw them against UCLA. Our first look at good quality competition with 3 of these 4 teams. And I'm excited about that as part of our Saturday of tons of sports, which starts off just an outstanding week going forward.
I'm like so excited. And it's so crazy to think about the fact that college basketball is here. Week 11 of the NFL season is here. American Thanksgiving is almost like there's so much going on in the sports world right now. And it's so good to have you on to discuss all of the action that we want to be laying this weekend. But if the people want more information from you, my dude, where can they find you online?
Yeah, I'm over at MRUS Authentic, MRUSS Authentic, and that's where we go for the celebrating and the commiserating. Everything that I write over for the score gets retweeted through there. Same thing with this podcast, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get to complain and celebrate and make fun of all of the things that we've done and what the players and the coaches and the referees are doing and all of that stuff. You guys know how Twitter works, right? So yeah, definitely one of the greatest times of the year. Next Tuesday's podcast is going to be electric with picks because we'll have 3 games for Thursday to talk about in the NFL. We'll have some college football stuff and obviously college basketball tournament stuff to talk about there as well. So yeah, it is on overdrive at this point in the season, in the year.
Can't wait for that, my dude. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much, sir. Anytime.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod once again. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this, the DRF Sports Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. From this, a brand new project for DRF Sports. If you're not familiar with the letters DRF, Daily Racing Forum has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. And now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, NCAA, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every single game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. And if you want to have access to all of the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where you get the usual previews every single day. And of course, we go in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. Thank you guys for tuning in every Tuesday and on Friday. That's all we got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at drf_sports.